Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2. Okay, testing. Now no bad sound settle right now if I stay over here. I gotta change these slides. Is it bothering you? Bothering you? Okay. We're gonna go a little slower. Good afternoon. Jeff, where are those announcements? You got those announcements?
No, I know what they are.
All right, come over and tell them. This is, my name is Mark Browning. Thank you for showing up today in this hot day. And we got coolers on. We got to open that door open maybe a little more. Mr. Jeff Dock, he's going to tell us what we got going in the future. This is today, 5/24/19, and this is about D-Day, Normandy, and World War II and how Evansville affected that. That's what we're talking about today. And he'll tell you about some other things that go on in the near future. And we got a handout out front if you need it.
Thanks for being here. I'm also doubling as the janitor today, so that's why I didn't dress up like he did. So, anyway, we've got 3 major events that are coming up. One of them Dr. Browning is in charge of at the Old National Bank in the Legacy Room, which is the very top floor. It's the best seat in the house as far as anything that goes on the river. And that's $40 a person, but it also includes lunch catered by Acropolis. And we're going to have 2 guest speakers, 2 generals. One of them here with us today. Where'd he go?
General Treat.
Yeah, General Treat is going to be speaking at one of the programs. Treat?
Treat.
Okay. And then we have another general that's going to be speaking later on in the afternoon about the things around 9/11 and what happened there. So that's one of the major things. But and then it's the best place. I mean, you're almost at eye level with the planes during the air show. It's really nice. And then I'm just a puppet. I just would put it wherever he puts me is where I go. So then, in addition to that, we've got something real neat that's happening on June 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. We've got a big B-17 Flying Fortress that's going to fly in here and keep us company for 4 days, just sitting right outside. And for $10 extra over and above the just admission to the, but we spent a lot of work getting them to come. And so for just the general admission to the museum, you get to walk all around it and talk to the crew and all that stuff. But then for an additional $10, you can actually walk through the plane from nose to tail. And it's a real experience if you haven't ever done that before. And then if you got a little extra money, they'll take you up and you can actually fly in the plane. I think the cheap seats are $475 a piece. So, and then, but you can also fly as the navigator or the bombardier for a little bit more money. And then what we're trying to do, we're trying to coordinate, there's a real neat ceremony going down on the LST on June 6th, which is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And at 9 o'clock, they're going to have a nice presentation ceremony. There's going to be a veteran there that was actually in World War II. And by the way, we've got one here with us today, a couple that are here with us today that are World War II veterans. But we're going to try and coordinate a flyover of the B-17 flying over. So you got a plane that was in World War II. You got a person on the plane that will be a World War II vet passenger, and there will be a World War II vet on the LST, and the LST was actually beached at D-Day. So it's going to be an amazing thing. And then on June 16th, any of you that have ever gone to the Evansville Symphonic Band concerts out at Central High School Auditorium, great venue for a concert of any kind. They'll have 800 to 900 people at those concerts. They have a concert every Sunday in the month of June. And on June 16th, the third Sunday, they're going to dedicate the entire program to the Evansville Wartime Museum, and it's going to be patriotic based. So it ought to be really neat. We'll have all 5 branches of services recognized, as well as the people in the audience and things like that. So just by you guys coming to things like this is what makes us happen. We really appreciate it. We've got a membership table set up over there for all the things that we have here. If you get a membership for $25 for an individual or $50 for a family membership, you can come to all these things all year for that one price. And we make sure and give you announcements ahead of time so then you know what's happening and things like that. So we really appreciate you being here today. Steve Whitty's the organizer of the entire week of events and back in the back. Alan Sanderson is our World War II veteran sitting back at that table. If you haven't met Alan, he's an interesting talk. He's 118 combat missions flying a P-47 as a pilot of a P-47. And 2 of his 118 missions were over D-Day on Normandy beaches. So we've got another gentleman here that's with us, a World War II vet, and thank you for being in attendance. How many other veterans do we have in the audience today? Raise your hand. Thank you very much. How many spouses of veterans do we have here today? There you go. So you serve too, and we realize that. So I'll shut up and let the show get on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for coming today. If you can't hear you, tell me. He talked about Alan Sanderson in the back row. He's a P-47 pilot. And then we have Mr. Kinchlow. He's up here. He was in the tanks in World War II up in the France area. So we're glad we have him. And then in the back row is Jim Hitch. He's a graduate of Central High School and was one of the fundraisers that helped pay, I think, raise $70,000 for a P-47 World War II, named the Central Bears. Out of the 6,200 planes or so made, he helped sponsor that. So he's also a World War II vet. So we have 3 World War II vets in our midst today. We have veterans of other wars here. Today we're going to concentrate. I don't stay interested in very many things very long, but I will tell you this World War II has me absolutely amazed. We're going to talk about Normandy. Let me talk about Normandy, and I think there's a movie called The Longest Day, and I probably saw it 1,000 times in the 1960s. My dad would play it over and over and over again, but The Longest Day is about D-Day, June 6, 1944. So we're going to go over some subtleties of that, talk about prefaces to that, and also how important that was. I'm just enamored by the people in World War II and our society here in Evansville. And we're going to bring up a lot of what Evansville did for World War II. So this is the Evansville Wartime Museum. It's going to sponsor all wars. We're not just World War II, but we're trying to track World War II as much as we can at the present time. We're going to work to all the other wars when we can. I would like the lights down, Mr. Dyke, on this side so people can see it. This is 1935. This is when Hitler went against the Versailles Treaty. Hitler became Chancellor about 1933, and then the Germans were a little destitute in the 30s, so they found a leader, and he was probably one of the world's greatest orator. He could convince you of anything. If you've heard of a Baptist preacher, he could probably beat them all. But he had the gift of gab, and he could talk people into a lot of things. Not that he's a friend of mine, but he was a great orator. And this was the start of things where he won against the Versailles Treaty. In about 1935, he started arming Germany. So this is where we're going to end up today. This is the Evansville paper on June 6, 1944. And you look, it says we took over France, and Churchill says few casualties. And I'll give you some preface remarks about other invasions we had, and we weren't in charge of the newspaper as well as we should have been. We weren't in charge of what you call propaganda. If any of you have been to war, you know propaganda can influence you a whole lot. I was in the Persian Gulf War, and propaganda was a big influence there, and other people in the military know that propaganda can influence. But in a couple of other invasions, we weren't on top of getting the press involved. There was no TV at that time. This was the next day. We were in charge of the press then. We did a good job of trying to get the people to understand what was going on. And it wasn't just propaganda. We were trying to say the truth. So these are the major skirmishes there in Germany. There's so many skirmishes. We had one of our board members named Dick who went over all these different flags, and these are all our flags. There's 14 up on the wall there, and you can look at them, and we put it up on YouTube. But he's discussed how every different of these 14 countries support us in World War II. But we're going to end up right here in Normandy today, and we're going to try to revolve around that. Can you still hear me back here, Jim? All right, cut now. Okay, how about now? I don't know what's wrong here, but testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, now just we're going to show a little bit about Battle of Dunkirk. Okay, that was 1939. What happened with testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. I guess I got big. When you look at Dunkirk there, about 320,000 troops were evacuated from Dunkirk. About 14-day period of time. Bad weather, bad ocean, much difficulty. And Churchill became enlightened at that time. Okay, we have to pause here until we get the microphone working right.
You're good right there.
Okay, is this all right? Okay, I won't move then. Okay. So Dunkirk was very important. We saved up to over 300,000 troops in World War II. Hitler, for some reason, stopped pushing them in the ocean and stopped trying to kill them all. We don't know why he did that, but we escaped from Dunkirk. But you found how mean the ocean was. We'll show the English Channel there, but the ocean and weather is a major obstacle in all wars, but it became an obstacle there. Next thing, Normandy invasion, the Battle of Great Britain. We got a little bit of big head when we beat them back there. But if you look at that distance between Normandy and then V-Day, VE Day on May 6, 1945, that took 11 months to happen. I lost my uncle during that time. We thought we were going to run them over real quick. We had pretty big egos ourselves, but we got figuring out how tough Hitler was and how strong a resistance he set. Now this is the English Channel. If you look at the narrowest area there, there's a doctor in the local area that swam the English Channel. There's only about 975 people that swam that 19 to 21 miles. Up by, you see what Calais is, that's the shortest period, and you can only run it, you can only swim that channel in about August because that's when the water's warm enough. It's around 62 to 64 degrees, pretty cold. I think can do it in as short as 10 or 11 hours, but usually takes longer than that. But so we didn't want to swim that time. That was too difficult for us. So we had to figure out how to get ships across. Any logical person would say that's how we're going to get our machines and people across that short area of water, and that's what Churchill did. When Churchill saw Dunkirk, there's a movie out on him, and there's a movie out on a lot of battles that were Academy Awards the last couple of years. I'd encourage you to listen to them, especially the Dunkirk. It shows you how difficult it was to escape. But he said, if we can get men and machines to the land safely, we're not going to win this war. And he learned that lesson from Dunkirk. So Hitler knew about this little English Channel too. So Hitler put his major man named Rommel, he brought him up from Africa and had him put defenses all up and down, from right up there near Dunkirk all the way down to near Cherbourg, and major defenses. And he had a couple years to put that up. And Rommel was not a lightweight. He knew what he was doing. And if Hitler would always have listened to him, they might even have done better. But if you look at trying to get a port, you need a good port. Well, Hitler was smart enough. If you look at Cherbourg there, Cherbourg is right there. I'll show you on the next slide here. That's Dunkirk, them leaving. You look at that, and the movie, this doesn't tell you as well as the movie does, but it was a terrible time to get people out, very difficult. This is, if you look at Dieppe is how you pronounce it. Most mispronounced word in the dictionary, just about. Dieppe. It's right here in this red spot here. And so in 1942, what's his name, Hitler, or not Hitler, but Churchill and the generals there thought, we'll invade Dieppe. And it was a major tragedy. Lost mostly Canadian soldiers there, but we didn't have a chance there. We invaded with about 5,000 to 6,000 troops, and it was a major catastrophe. So he learned that it wasn't easy. The beach looked a little like Utah, and this is what it looked like after we lost a lot of troops there. So remember, Normandy didn't happen for another couple of years, but this was a preparation time. Italian invasion. If you read about the invasion of the Italian Peninsula, the terrain there is much different than if you look at D-Day in Normandy. Italian invasion was very, very difficult, and Hitler knew you were coming because we'd come across Africa. So there was not much surprise in that invasion. Now, about 1944, this is last of April 44, called Exercise Tiger. At that time, we were trying to prepare our troops and give them some practice. So this Operation Tiger was over here on this bay, and this is the area where it is, right where that little red dot is. That's south of London. There it is over by Southampton. But that's where we were practicing, and troops were practicing there with invasion of the shore. It looked a lot like Utah Beach, a lot like Omaha Beach, so it was a good practice ground. And these are some of the results of the practice ground. This was a final rehearsal. The rehearsal was about from April 22nd to April 30th of 1944. And it was, we used 30,000 troops. We used live ammunition and about 10 LST boats and some other boats that were supposed to be protected. There was a destroyer that wasn't on site. So what happened is, it's just like in D-Day, you want to bombard with the big guns to soften up the shore, and that's what happened. About five battleships softened up the shore on D-Day, and this is what they tried there. But there was a problem with communication. One ear didn't hear the other ear, and they started, there was a 1 hour difference in time, which we lost close to 450 men because of the timing. And at this time, it came from World War I, we used H. H was ours on D-Day. After that, it's D-Day +1, D-Day -1, but we used H, ours, on D-Day itself. So this is what happened. We had a convoy sitting out there in the ocean of LSTs, and who saw them down in Cherbourg. We had the German submarines were based there, and we were supposed to be watching for them, but somehow they didn't detect them. So they came over and hit a bunch of LSTs. Out of about 8 or 10 LSTs, 4 of them were hit. The third one there, the fourth one, number 531, was made here in Evansville. It was a 56 ship here, and it sunk in 6 minutes. All the men died on the ship. The other ones were injured. So this was a terribly difficult lesson for us. We were practicing for D-Day. And with that ship, the big thing you wanted to find out, 10 officers were on these ships, and they all had a briefcase, and it had what we were going to do on Operation Overlord. That was invasion of Normandy. And so until they found those 10 people, they were possibly going to cancel the D-Day invasion a month subsequent to that. So this is, the other things we learned is radio frequencies had to be on the same frequency. That's why the 1 hour difference in time occurred. Life vests. If you read some of the stories about these young men dying, the soldiers, remember, I'm 150 or 100, 200 pounds, I got 150 of things on me, and what happens, you turn upside down, and they didn't know how to get the life belts on well, so they tried to counsel them before D-Day invasion. But remember, these troops are all top heavy with all their pack. And then they got some plans for how to pick up some of these survivors for D-Day itself. So this was a practice ground. This was about a month before the time that D-Day happened. Now, all of you have heard about Normandy and D-Day. This was the red is where the Germans are, and the blue is where the Americans and the Allies are invading. And if you look at that, there's a little blue stripe of how far you look at how far our air was controlling. It was just about 30 miles in. They didn't control everything, but they were trying to protect us from any enemy fire. So this was a major invasion. Eisenhower was in charge of it, and they had dug deep to get him. He promoted like a skyrocket. You don't ever see that in the military, but he was promoted to handle this. He had done well down in the invasion of Italy, and they picked him. They wanted to take Marshall, but FDR said, Marshall, you have to stay here in D.C. with me. You can't go out there. So it became him that they picked. These are the two major beaches that the United States attacked. One is Utah and one is Omaha. Now, I've been there twice, and you might know Woody Woodall, but he used to be in charge of the post office here, and his daughter-in-law is still living. He's got a couple kids still living in town, but he would tell me this story every day. Every time I saw him, I heard the story 100 times. I was still amazed at it. But he went in at Utah Beach. We only lost about 157 men at Utah Beach. We didn't lose a whole lot there. But if you ever go to Utah Beach, if you think the height of this ceiling's high, it's higher than the height of this ceiling. And it's a straight up wall. It's straight up. And he said he got on the rope that the paratroopers sent him down, and they were shooting bullets on him. I couldn't climb a rope 10 feet up, and he climbed it all the way to the top. And I guess when bullets are going after you, your epinephrine's a little going. So he told that story, and I couldn't believe it, but I really think it was true. But him and we did this talk in 2006, and Tom Howe talked about his things in World War II, and my dad talked. It was at St. Mary's Church. That was 12 years ago or so, but he did talk about that. But that's Utah Beach. Utah Beach is the first one over there. Now, Omaha Beach we didn't do as well. Omaha Beach is the next beach over, and Americans were in charge of that. And we lost, if I recall correctly, 37,000 troops. I may be a little off on that, but we really got slaughtered there. Now, what happened that day is the air bombing. It was bad weather, so they were using instruments, and instruments are difficult in bad weather. So the weather was not good. The seas were 5 to 7 feet high. Now, you go out to sea at 5 to 7 feet high. I'm seasick and nothing flat. 5 to 7 feet high. So all these guys were floating around on the 5th, and then they canceled the 5th. They went back to port. Then they went out on the 6th. Okay, you are all seasick. So 5 to 6 high, and think of the wind was 15 to 25, not 15 to 20 knots. So it was not good weather. Now, Utah Beach was protected by the mount or the land there, so it was not bad. The swells weren't as bad; they were more protected. But you go to Omaha Beach, it was just very, very difficult. The bombers were supposed to go parallel with the sand. Now, Hap Arnold, I think, was in charge. He was in charge of. He did a real good job over in the Burmese area where we went from India to China, and he did a good job. So Hap Arnold got in charge of some of this here. And Hap Arnold, it wasn't totally his fault, but the Air Force, and we got an Army Air Corps guy here, but they were supposed to bomb all up and down the beach and leave great big craters in the sand, so our soldiers could hide in the sand and make it as essentially a foxhole. And also hit some of those pillboxes that the Germans had set up. There were some as deep as 10 feet of concrete. So the bombers, instead of going parallel, they just went into the land and dropped the bombs back there. And that did not help our attack. And partly it was because of that why we lost so many soldiers. But there's lots of hedgerow there. It was very open territory. If you've ever been to Omaha Beach, you're a sitting duck there. And they said the Germans just didn't have enough bullets, is what it was. But en masse, we finally took over at Omaha Beach. Now, this is just a blow-up view of Omaha Beach, and the red is the Germans and the blue is the Americans. Now, these other two beaches over here, this is Juneau and Sword. There were 5 beaches that time, and the Canadians and the English were in charge of these 2 beaches, and the only ones that really got what they were supposed to get that day was the Canadians. They got some road they were supposed to get. The English were supposed to get Caen, and they got right around it, and then they say Montgomery got a little antsy and they didn't get Caen. So that was a problem on that day. But now just look at all these forces. Northern France, 25 July all the way to August, and the blue is us. We're taking over a little bit, and then the red is the Germans. But if you look, Cherbourg is down here. I see Cherbourg in the corner, and we're putting them out of business there in late June. So it took us 2 or 3 weeks to put them out of business. They had a great port there, but there was a guy that was in charge of making sure we had enough, the Germans had enough mines in there and enough obstacles, that port was not able to be used till close to October of 1944. So even though we had captured the city in late June, it was a useless port. There were so many bombs there, and the guy got Hitler's highest award because he did such a good job at mining and making sure that port was not very usable. There were 3 good ports that could be used, and we weren't even able to use ports for up to that 3 or 4 month period of time after June 6th. So now imagine you've got to get men and machines over on this land, and we have no ports. So that's partly what we're going to talk about today. This is some of what Hitler put up, and we've got fake ones over to the left of you, and these are the little smaller that we've got. We got wood one with barbed wire, and that's what Hitler and Rommel put around in the sand. And these are made of steel, and they would hurt your boat when it came in. Now Rommel, one of the mistakes Rommel made, Rommel thought they were going to invade at a high tide. So if you're in high tide, you wouldn't see any of these things. And so he thought it was going to be high tide that we were going to invade. And we did invade at low tide, not high tide. And so we could see those things, and people could try to miss some of these things. But you just see those big steel things, but you don't see all the mines that are under them. Once a mine would hit, we'd have major problems. So Hitler, one of the problems him and Rommel had is there's so much area to cover, you can't mine and put something all along the French coast. And they didn't know where we were coming in. And we did a lot of faking up by Calais. Remember the burgers of Calais by Rodin, but that's the narrowest area. And the day of D-Day, we made some fake runs there and even had ships going that direction, and they pulled back. Because that's the shortest. That's only about 1922 miles at Calais. So Hitler was really armed up there and had a lot of divisions of tanks there. This is just, you can't read any of this, but this just talked about a troop he was a son of a pastor, preacher, and he prayed that he would make it back. He wasn't praying about getting a bunch of wards. He was worried about getting back. And any of you have been to war, that is a major fear. The human being tries to, there's a very strong instinct for survival. So we all want to protect ourselves, and then we are told to protect our country, but that instinct sometimes can come out of protecting yourself. Well, this kid still wanted to help his country, but he talked about being out on the LST ship for a whole day before. This area, you can't read it, but just talks about Rommel and how there was a little bit of stalemate, and they couldn't get a hold of him for the first 24 hours of this invasion. And we were just lucky that the Germans were a little slow on moving their troops. What I'm going to just show you is how much the Germans made machines, and how much the Allies made machines, and how many more machines we made. Because that's what Evansville's known for, is it's made for how much it did in World War II and help with making armor to win this war. So if you just look at that, that's how much money we spent. If you look at the money in 1994 dollars, we're $378 billion in 1944, same amount in 43, but we ramped it up from 40 all the way to 44. A lot of those dollars were spent here in Evansville. If you look at Germany, they were a lot of spending before because they avoided the Versailles Treaty back in 1935 to 38, and their spending was still pretty high in 44 as well as Japan's. Okay, just look at how many aircraft. Look at the percentage of what the United States made in World War II. Just aircraft, 300,000 aircraft. So Evansville made 2% of the aircraft. Evansville, if you look at the 1940 census, we are about 0.1% of the population of the United States. 0.1%. We made 2%. That's 20 times more. We made 2% of the aircraft in World War II, the P-47s. You look at the guns, we didn't make many guns, but there are some guns here on show, and we have a gun called the M1 that was one of the most used rifles Made 5 million of those in World War II, 5 million 45s, and some M1 Grands, but we made the bullets for those guns. So this was a big deal making bullets. Vehicles, Chrysler helped make some of the vehicles, help redo some of the Grousers, and help revamp about 1,600 of the tanks in World War II. If you look at little trucks, and we've got some over here, there's a place called HERCULES. And HERCULES is one of our biggest employers in Henderson and in Evansville. Still have a place where they make truck trailers, but they made lots of wood trailers for the back of these things that we made, trucks, and had to transport things. How many Americans abroad? If you look at that, the last number in 45, looks like 61%. I've seen statistics where we had 15 million soldiers. We have 3 right now in the room that were in World War II. 15 million, some people say 14 million in World War II, but 61% were already overseas. Not all of them were at D-Day. I think the number I found was 1.5 million were on that island of England there, ready to come over. That's still a large amount ready to invade Europe. This is a busy slide, and I really just put it up there to show you how many submarines. In the last column on the right is submarines. And you look at the submarines, I mean, Mr. Kuhn talked about how many people, how many just supply ships were hit and other ships were hit. But look at how many submarines the Germans had. 944, we had 52, and Japan had close to 133. Divisions, if you look at divisions, why this is important, divisions, if you look at divisions over on the far right in 1944, where did he have all these troops? 157 divisions were over taking care of Russia. Russia was a big problem. Russia was so big, nobody should ever take Russia on. That was Hitler's problem, but he had a big ego, and he knew more than the generals. 157 divisions. Then you go look at the next one. How many divisions did he have in France? That was at D-Day time. He only had 1/3 of his troops there. And if you go over to the other column, way on the left there, it shows how many divisions he had down in Africa. He only had 4 divisions down in Africa, and they held us back there for a long time. So if you think of it, he had 50 divisions more in northern France that he could have unleashed on us pretty quick and maybe pushed us back in the ocean. But because he was a little slow moving, and we could get supplies over. And I'm going to talk next about supplies. Supplies is a big deal. If you don't get all your supplies over, you can't win anything. This is just the air combat. We've got a air pilot here, but you look at how many was available, and you look at the ratio there of bombers, fighters, in total, and you look at our ratio early in the war, it wasn't as good, but we were at 7.4 to 1 over Germany by the end of the war. Because I said we made 275,000, but that's all the Allies. That's a lot of planes, and that's a big ratio. So when you look at the war, it wasn't that we made things better than Hitler or better than the Japanese, but we made more of them. Every time it came around, we had another tank coming out, another tank. If we were pretty equal in quality, but we had volume after volume because of what the Japanese general or admiral said in World War II when we sunk one of his boats. He said, "You've just awoken a sleeping giant." The sleeping giant was the industrial infrastructure of the United States, and Evansville was a premier example of that. A couple of secrets of, if you look at the manpower just over in the Soviet Union, how much Hitler had over there in 1941, and remember, he lost in Moscow on December 5th of 41. When did the Japanese bomb us? December 7th. If he would have captured Moscow on December 5th instead of getting beat, we would have had all that fear of him owning Russia and also the Japanese coming in on us. So then you look later in the war, he had to pull some troops to other places down to 40%. Then just the heavy equipment, you look at the heavy equipment in 1940, I'm just showing that to say how much it changed, made a big difference. A lot of heavy equipment is already, Germany already had it, but we ramped up. It took us a year or two and 2 great big ponds to buffer us. Those ponds, the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, are pretty good buffers, probably better than any machine we can make. It takes it's very difficult for anybody to come over and beat us. Just show you the divisions again, and of Germans, and you see that over in Russia over there. Now, this is the ratio of the Allied to the German ratio. If you look, it was a 3-to-1 ratio back in 1942. It moved up to 5-to-1 ratio. So we outnumbered the Germans by far, and we had some good generals leading us. Allied bombs, if you just look at how many bombs were dropped, most of them in 1944. Lots of tonnage there in 1944. So now, that's just a general outline, just so you know that we couldn't win this war without some of the things. So I can't go everything that we made here in Evansville. Over 300 different war items are made here, over 80 different factories. So how can I cover them all? I'm going to try to give you the highlights of things that I think were important in D-Day. So this is an LST, and you look, the important thing on the LST, you look and it's called landing ship tank. My dad was on it for 4 years in World War II, so he would tell me about it very frequently. But it is an amazing ship. If you look how they created this ship, they went down to South America in 1938 or so, and big oil tankers were moving oil into Venezuela and landing on the shore. And they looked similar to this, and so that's where the idea came from. And they've modified it a bunch. And they got ballast in there. The guy that helped make it was a submariner, so he showed how to raise in the water and lower in the water. So way out in the ocean, you want to lower it in the water so you don't be top heavy. When you come to shore, this is the magic of this baby. 7 feet in the front, or 7 feet in the bow of the ship, and 1.5 feet in the bow, and 7 feet in the stern. And that means you can get up on a sandy beach and unload 15 Sherman tanks. So this is amazing. Now, it wasn't always a nice sandy shore. Well, I'm going to show you some pictures of D-Day, and we landed on Normandy. But you look at this is causeways. They used this a lot in the war. They would wrap those around the ship, and you'd have to lay them down, and that would help transport, because the LST, even with those dimensions I gave you, and it could get to shallow water, there's lots of bad coral out west. If you went to Japan, and you look at a lot of photography of Okinawa, and I scuba dive there a lot, I would have to walk 300 to 600 feet to get over the coral reef. And I was in 3 feet of water, and then I would drop down. So if you look at all the pictures of that, they're out past 600 feet. Now, Normandy wasn't like that. It was all a sandy beach. But you look at this causeway, they have causeways to help get rid of those heavy tanks onto the shore. That's what it looked like as well. Now, those are davits on the side. We have one, we got about, I think, 4 davits on our LST downtown. The davits would hold one of these. This is a Higgins boat to the left. It could hold 2 Jeeps and 36 soldiers. So those davits, if you look at that, there's 6 davits there. That's 6 times 36. You get 200 soldiers that you get down and get to shore. Just by them, they usually wouldn't stay in the ship or the little boat going down. They'd climb down ropes and get in it once it was down. That's not easy. I've watched them pull this up on the LST in 15-mile-an-hour winds down in front of our museum there, and that captain of the boat did a good job, because the great big LST was like a sail, so he had to hold that steady, and one of these engines wasn't working. They pulled it up, but that was in maybe about 2 feet, 1 foot of wave. Think about 5 feet of wave, or 7 feet of wave. Nature is one of our most difficult problems. But this LST, you see the front open and then the davits there. These are what they looked like with some men before they were getting ready to go to war. But these little things are not seaworthy. You couldn't get that over 17 miles very easy, so a lot of them came off the ships and they got onto ships. These were not seaworthy for those 5-foot waves. That'd be all right in the Ohio River, but it's not too well out in the ocean. Now, these are some of the trucks, and you look at the trucks unloaded from the LST right after D-Day, or right at that period of time, and those trucks unload supplies. Remember the supply chain? The supply chain for Hitler to take over Moscow and also try to go to Stalingrad was 1,000 miles. And that's what was his problem, 1,000-mile supply chain. We only had a supply chain from Normandy all the way to Germany, but the supply chain for us was difficult. This is just another truck, and you look at some of those trucks, the backs of trucks are made here. This is Hercules, and was one of our biggest employers at the turn of the 19th century. they helped make the backs to these. I think they had a contract with some of the auto companies up in Detroit to make the back part of the auto. This is just, I'm sure all of you know this, but we made 1,000 LSTs or 1,100 in World War II. We made more than anybody else in the United States. We made 168 a year, 16 to 17%. And about that many invaded in Normandy. We had 70% of our ships used in Normandy. So it was about the same percentage. They just had to, once they got done here, they'd have to go down New Orleans. This is what it looked like, an aerial view. Busy place, that's where your Mee Johnson plant is, and there's our Mee Johnson's right by there. This is what it looked like, 19,000 employees. Just so you know, our biggest employees, Deacon of St. Mary's and Toyota, about 5,000 each. This was 19,000 of one roof, 24/7. Lights you could see from about 5 miles away. Very busy place. We never made a ship before, but we made it well. If you go to Duke Energy and you watch how they make all these, how they weld things at Duke Energy and other places, they have to do x-rays on all their welds. There was no x-raying then. These women and men welded these ships, and they welded them well. My dad was on them. There's very few defects in this. That means the welds had to hold this steel in very tough weather. Some of them hit the typhoons out west. This you can't see, but this is from the Naval Archives in Washington, D.C. And this is just a list of what happened to our ships. And in I went down every one with the librarian at Willard. And by June of this year, June of 44, we'd only made half the ships. Only 75 were made. So on there you can't see it, but half of them went to out west. Some of them went to training, and then the other half went out east. So we didn't have all of them that we made. If you look, we made 168 during the war, but only 29 were used over there in Normandy. That's still the percent that was used of LSTs in. At that time, by about February, March of 1944, we'd only had made 73 of them. We were only halfway done. And half of those went to, or a third of those went to PAC, and then 29 went to D-Day. We also gave some to the British, and the British had 7 of them at the invasion there at Sword and Juno Beach. This is another just view of how it can get machines and people to land, and that's a causeway built along from D-Day. Trains were the big deal. A lot of trains from over Mount Vernon, Illinois, and over 5,000 train cars were brought over there because you had to get all this material inland to our troops and get them to the front line. This is, these are like big canoes. These are 25 tonners, but this was made of international steel here. You had some family members working international steel, but these were to support what we call the Bailey bridges. So Hitler was tearing all the bridges down, so over the Seine River, there's a friend, he isn't here today, but Harold Pettis, he went across the Seine River on one of these Bailey bridges. Let me see, I don't have a Bailey bridge here, I have one later, but they support the bridge, and tanks, everything else goes across the Seine River. And within 24 hours, they could rebuild a bridge. So the Ohio River's going to get I-69, and it's not going to be 24 hours to be made. It'll be about 3 or 4 years. But these men would put a bridge up in 24 hours and go across the Seine River. And from things that were made here at International Steel, part of this, it looks like a big canoe that would go under the bridge and support 70,000-pound tanks. So Evansville has to be proud of the Bailey bridges. This is just called the grasshopper. The LSTs even had planes fly off of them. They called them grasshoppers. There's, I think, only 1 or 2 grasshoppers left in the United States now. Patton was big in tanks. He loved the tanks. But over in Louisville, they built this is a fake building there, and they crammed all these LSTs, or all these tanks in there. This building is the same dimension as an LST, because they wanted to know, could we get them in and out? And remember the ventilation, once you turn all those tanks on, everybody's going to die of carbon monoxide, so Cook in town helped make a lot of ventilation systems. Now, before I move away from the LST, I want to tell you how important it was. Mulberry's, this was the idea of England. Now, the Mulberry was making a fake harbor real quick, not a fake one, a real harbor real quick. So England had this idea. They would make silos that were 100 feet tall, and then they drug them all over there and then sunk them outside Omaha Beach and Juneau Beach and made a harbor. And this is what the harbor would look like, so you could protect against the bad weather and the ships could land there. This one at Omaha Beach only lasted until June 20th. June 20th, there was the worst storm in Europe in 20 years, and it tore Juneau beaches up. But not Juneau, Omaha. Juneau was left there. This is what it looked like an aerial view. You have it protected, so you've made your own fake harbor. And England spent a lot of time making this, and it's a good idea. This is what they look like making the silos before they sunk them, and this is what it looked like how you could transport all kinds of machines and material. This is the Bailey Bridge there was not Bailey Bridges out in the ocean, but the Bailey Bridges were used more inland on, it was a total of 200 miles that were used in Europe and over 40 miles of bridges during World War II. This is what it looked like at D-Day. You think you got to cross that. Now this is just comparison. You've got to get machines and men to land. And this is, the Mulberries was England's idea. And if you look at the amount that the Mulberry did, Mulberry, that was enough tonnage at D-Day plus 30 and D-Day plus 60, 6,700 tons. Where you look at the Omaha and then you go look at down at the other beach there, Utah, 16,000 tons. So it doubled the amount of Mulberry. So what we did with the LSTs, remember we had no harbor. So they're back and forth every day. And they didn't have to use the Mulberries. They would get to the Normandy beach and they'd unload their people and machines. This was after the war, but I wanted to show you that for the life raft. The life raft was made here at National Furniture, made a lot of life rafts for different ships. George Cook and Sons here right across near Johnson, but they helped make the ventilation system for the LST. If you didn't have a ventilation system, you'd get carbon monoxide poisoning in that ship. This is what the ventilation system looks like, and you had to get rid of the carbon monoxide. International Steel, it's not in business anymore, but makes the round doors for the hotels in the city, but they helped make the pontoon bridges and made a lot of steel for the LST. And we have the original book when Jonathan Wolfgang, he was the head engineer at the LST plant. And his son had the original documents, and he's safe for 40 years and has given it to the museum. So we have it on our file. We don't have it out in the open, but if you look at the LST exhibit, some of those images Stephen Whitty has blown up for the wall. But those are the original, the first LST made. It was number 157. It was also in D-Day. It was also over in Normandy. There's a guy named Raymond Clayton that was on that. He just died 3 months ago. But Raymond Clayton has talked here and talked at multiple places, but he was on the first LST made number 157. Those are just those part of the Bailey Bridges that are being put in a train car, and train car was a good way to transport things. Trains were really big in Europe at that time. If trains weren't there, all that wouldn't have happened to Auschwitz. They say 4 million Jewish people went by the train to Auschwitz, by the trains. So the trains did some good and did some bad. That's just a picture of a Bailey Bridge made here at our local International Steel. Massacre Steel also helped make parts of the LST ship. Massacre Steel's not here anymore, but they make the front facade of a lot of houses downtown on 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street, and very good artwork, and helped make parts of the Sherman tank. So during World War II, it just says we stepped up the bombing all the bridges, bombing everything to make a D-Day a little softer landing. Republic Aviation, some of your relatives worked there. That's where they made the P-47. Remember, we never made an airplane before, but P-47, 6,600 or so, about 8,000 were made it. I'm sorry about this, I can't, the vibration, I don't know what to do about it. But the P-47, that's how many you made here. We didn't make the engines here, but Republic Aviation, lots of employees. It's that blue building down the block here. And we produced 10 planes a day, one every 2.5 hours. That's a lot of planes. If you go look at Mr. Ford, Henry Ford had Willow Run, and he made one B-24 an hour. So he made 24 planes a day. Those are bigger planes, but he had a lot more expertise than us. But we made a lot to be proud of here. Now, what did we use in World War II? Over there, I've talked to Alan Sanderson about some of this. They had groups of P-47s protecting our Army there, and they did a good job of protecting. Remember, they didn't go inland very far. They go inland very far, the Germans would just tease them and make them go too far because our gasoline amount was 270 gallons. There's an imitation of one over there. And the pilot's sitting right on 270 gallons. At a later time, we could add more gas to it. But during that time, you know, the range is 1,000 miles. That's 500 one way and 500 the other. So we'd be careful not running out of gas. But 3 squadrons. So that's about what I'd figure about 1,080 for that day. And only about half of them were made here in Evansville. So 400 to 500 of the P-47s probably made in Evansville. I cannot find a real statistic. Ken Wilson knows more about anything, and I've emailed and called him. I have no answer. He knows everything about P-47s. He lives over in Indiana by the stadium, but he has his basement's full of records on P-47s. He knows what every P-47 did here in Evansville from beginning to end, and he's working on a book, and he's given a lot of his records to the Willard Library. So he is a real student of the P-47. This is what the gun looked like on the P-47. If you look at that model over there, they're called Browning automatics. But the gun, when you pull the gun on the trigger, it will, in 23 seconds, all the bullets are gone. Each gun has 250 bullets. Each wing has 1,000 on each side. The power of that plane, the power of that bullet of this plane, of that P-47, is like a 150 truck going 60 miles an hour. So it'll knock over a locomotive or it'll knock over a tank. That's what this P-47, but it could also, it was, all the fighters in World War II were water cooled. This was air cooled. So one person got 200 bullets in the P-47. It was like a tank. They called it the jug. It could take things. So if the bullets hit the radiator, it didn't make any difference there. But if I put a bullet in your radiator, your car lasts about 5 miles. The same with those planes. The P-51, the Messerschmitt, the Zero, all were water cooled. This was air cooled, made a big difference. So the P-47 was a tremendous plane. More kills in World War II than the P-51, even though the P-51 gets a lot of notoriety. But if you look at this table, it says how many we made by 1944. So we only had half of them made by the middle of 44. So by the time D-Day happened, we only had half of them made. And this just shows you how many made Farmingdale. We passed up Farmingdale, or got close to them in 1944. And in 45, we actually made more than they did. This is just a scale of how far the plane would go. If you look at the far left down low, it says 415. That's how far, you know, that is the P-47 D model, and that's what was made at that time. So you didn't have a lot of distance. All those other ones got further distance. They figured out how to put more gas in them, and they get up to 600-700 gallons of gas. Some of them 1,100 gallons. So when they got to Japan, you had a lot of ways to fly. So they modified them a lot. There was a modification center that was talked about last night, but they modified these P-47s so they go longer distances. This is just a table of how many were made and where. And you look, by 1944 June, we'd only made half of them by that time. That's how tough they are. Look at them, they come back and land. And Alan will tell you that if you ask any questions. One other plant here is a Chrysler plant, and that's a Chrysler plant. And I can't think that Chrysler could be enough about World War II. Chrysler was very important in World War II. The first contract awarded to Evansville was about January 15th of 1942. And if we didn't have Chrysler here, they showed we could make things. They came to town in 1935, left in 1958. But Chrysler was already making cars, putting them on the barges and sending them out. But they knew we could produce. They never made a bullet before, but they talked to the CEO of Chrysler. He said, yeah, we can make bullets. He didn't know anything. Oh, we can make those bullets. But you know, big ego, and they did do it. And so ran out of brass in World War II, and the bullets are a lot better than that, so they had to modify them and make them out of steel within 2 or 3 period of time. So there's a big display about bullets in the other room. You got a chance to look at it, but making 3.5 billion bullets, you stretch my finger, India and across around the globe that go 3 times that many bullets. Mostly women made the bullets. They also made incendiary bombs. We burnt Japan up. If you look at the loss of houses, loss of real estate in Japan, we burned 3 cities up in the 1945, from 42 to 45. So incendiary bombs, we made a lot of them here. $7 million contract. And truck rebuilds and tank rebuilds. If you look at the grousers, they rebuilt 800,000 grousers. The grousers is the part on the bottom that the tracks. So it was a real rebuild place. Motor vehicles, just so you understand our industrial infrastructure here. Look at the motor vehicles, 1939, made in the United States. 4 per person in the United States. All the others were 40 per person. So we already were an industrial giant, and we didn't necessarily know it. But we made that many cars, so we ramped up and we could do things for the other. This is what the bullet case looked like. This is a 45 bullet, and made a lot of them. Made them also at Chrysler, and on the bottom of these bullets it'll say either E meaning EC meaning Chrysler, it might be ES meaning Sunbeam. Now Sunbeam factory was right here where the Dairy Queen is, within a few blocks here. I think it was right here, but they made tons of things. A guy named Carson gave us all those model planes, and he was the president of Sunbeam Plastics, and he made his fortune. If you go put an antifreeze in your car, that little cap he made there, and that's where partly he made his fortune. But Sunbeam got a lot of awards, E awards in World War II. That's what it looks like at Chrysler. That's where they practice, over by the old North High School. That's what a Sherman tank looks like. And this is just a picture of Cervelle. Now, if you look on top of the LST downtown, there's 40 millimeter guns down there, and most ships had 40 millimeter guns. So we made 20 million casings for those 40 millimeters. So 40 millimeters were used as anti-aircraft. So that's what came out of Evansville, Cervelle. Cervelle got 5 E awards. That's a lot of E awards in World War II. Some cities didn't get any. We had about 36 here. Only the top 4% were given any E awards, and we got 36 on multiple different plants. This is a picture of Sunbeam. They had it on display after the war. They made bullets, and they made so many things you couldn't even count. Now, that man over there by the door, his picture's over there, is named Thomas Martin, and he was in charge of Hoosier Cardinal. And Hoosier Cardinal, he was probably the father of plastics. He learned a lot about plastics, went to Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and brought that innovation down here. So what's it called, emulsion, or there's some certain name for plastics, but he's the father of plastics. So that bubble top you can barely see next to the engine, they changed from that it's called a bird cage on that plane over there, and they changed it to a bubble top, and he made a lot of tops for the B-24s and a lot of other aircraft. But that man over there got a business award here from Evansville, and he deserves it. I think he died 1963. His son died about 2010. His daughter-in-law is still living in town. But he brought plastics to Evansville. Some people call Evansville the plastic capital of the world, and it's because of that man over there, and partly because of World War II. There's Sunbeam, and I think it was right down the block here. It's right on 57 here, so it's right along here somewhere where Sunbeam Plastics was. Meade Johnson, all of you know, made some IV protein that would have been used during World War II at D-Day when soldiers were injured. Igor Brothers made a lot of baking products. It's over on First Avenue. Evansville Veneer, because we made a lot of guns in the war, who made the wood stocks? Evansville Veneer. That's a picture of one of the guns in the cabinet over there. Paratroopers, lots of them hung around here because they were down at, they were 101st Airborne, pretty big deal in World War II. If you look at the history of paratroopers, it's bigger in Russia. Russia trained everybody from 35 to 40, and they never used a paratrooper. They had 50,000 paratroopers, never used them at all. Hitler used them twice on the island of Greece, and he didn't like it, and he quit using paratroopers. We used a lot of paratroopers. In D-Day, we used a lot of them around here. This is a C-47. We've got Mr. Stanley's exhibit is in the other room. He had Stanley clothes in Evansville, but he was a pilot for a C-47. This is a plane that would carry 19 soldiers, and they jump out of it. These were what the paratroopers went in. We've had this here in our hangar, and it barely fits in that door. That's how wide the wing is. It is a very nice plane. It goes softly, but slow as a turtle, so it's a sitting duck up there. but it was the same plane that the U of E students crashed in. This is how many paratroopers made in Russia, and they didn't even use it. Never split oil toilet seat. It's right across from Bossy Field, I think called Crawford Doors, but that was at that time owned by I-Kemp Rubber. If you ever heard of Mr. and Miss I-Kemp, Richard I-Kemp, the rubber on your pedal of your car, when you go put your brakes on, that's who makes them, is I think it's mid-state rubbers. But it was never split oil toilet seats, and I think the old home building downtown would make these rubber seats, if you ever sat on the toilets there, and they made them for the LSTs, but that was made in a plant here. U of E had cadets there to teach them how to fly, and this is some of the cadets. Some of the practice field was right at Burkhardt and Lloyd. That was a place to practice there. The last thing was women. They didn't let women much in World War II. The draft didn't include women, and we actually were short of troops in 44, and they said if they would have let women in, it'd have been different. But the women were not drafted. The women didn't come in World War II. Now they could have volunteered and get in, but that was, some people thought it was a major problem why we didn't have women. Okay, now that's an awful lot of information, and I missed a lot of companies, but I'd open up the floor to questions if anybody has any questions. Okay, I have no questions. Then you just make yourself at home, look around here, and we've got a whole bunch of other things for you to see and do, and Jeff Dye talked about all our different programs. Thank you for coming out today.
How long they shot? Good job.